This celestial event aligns with the 500-year-old cipher of Century 2, Quatrain 46. The trajectory suggests a long spark impacting a transhistorical landscape, threatening a civilization that spans the Renaissance to the modern era. This decoding signifies a profound intersection of orbital mechanics and prophetic literature. A movable feast of prophecy. Nostradamus' 1555 work utilizes retroactive clairvoyance, where ambiguous linguistic structures in French, Latin, and Greek allow modern events to be projected onto 500-year-old quatrains. By integrating temporal pattern matching with global event projection, we can decode the 942 poetic verses. This data-driven analysis treats the centuries as a dynamic dataset, testing the alignment between Renaissance astrological predictions and contemporary predictive analytics. The 2026 cipher. This little French verse from Century 2, Quatrain 46, predicts of greater trouble following initial human suffering. It describes a celestial event, a long spark running, coinciding with terrestrial plagues, famine, and war. Scientifically, this serves as a linguistic dataset where archaic descriptors like blood and fire are mapped onto modern environmental and geopolitical crises, suggesting a renewal of the centuries through systemic upheaval. The post-Cold War vacuum. The Great Trouble is identified as the recent global pandemic and the erosion of multilateralism. This vacuum leads to a greater one, a multipolar system defined by geo-economic confrontation and the dismantling of the post-Cold War order. The 2026 outlook utilizes these 500-year-old verses as a framework to analyze the transition from a unipolar world to a fragmented, high-tension international landscape. Environmental tipping points. Prophetic rain, blood, and famine find literal parallels in current climate instability. Extreme droughts in the northwestern US and Europe are projected to trigger 2026 agricultural shocks. Blood is interpreted as severe red tides from ocean acidification, while the Ticino prophecy warns of catastrophic flooding from melting alpine glaciers. These indicators represent critical biospheric thresholds manifesting as predicted ancient omens. The geopolitical crucible. The steel and plague of the cipher signify the dawn of AI-dominant electrostates and modern autonomous warfare. Drone swarms and directed energy weapons embody the steel, while plague represents lingering psychological anxieties and biological threats in a multipolar world. This analysis views technology not just as a tool, but as a prophetic driver of historical shifts and societal misery. Cosmic triggers for earthly chaos. In the 16th century view, celestial anomalies were physical triggers for drought and political upheaval. Fire from the sky is a recurring motif used by Nostradamus to mark profound transitions. Scientifically, this reflects how atmospheric or orbital events are culturally processed as markers of historical volatility, linking cosmic phenomena directly to the stability of human civilizations. The long spark running is consistently interpreted by historical commentators as a great comet. In the architecture of the prophecies, a comet acts as a definitive chronological marker for the renewal of the centuries. This celestial body signals the end of an era and the start of a period characterized by intense global transition and systemic restructuring. The literal manifestation of the spark. The Atlas Comet family represents the literal long spark arriving in 2026. Its trajectory aligns with the predicted peak of mid-decade global volatility, providing a tangible astronomical anchor for the prophecy. By mapping the comet's path through the zodiac, from Taurus to Libra, analysts seek to synchronize celestial mechanics with human historical cycles. Pattern seeking in the chaos. Seeking meaning in these verses is a manifestation of apophenia, the human tendency to find patterns in ambiguous data. During times of extreme societal stress, the brain is biologically wired to seek connections as a coping mechanism. This psychological reflex makes open-ended, centuries-old verses highly attractive for processing modern crises, regardless of their actual predictive validity. reflecting modern anxieties. The 2026 interpretations function as a brilliant cultural mirror. When modern institutional narratives fail to explain a rapidly changing world, humanity returns to myth to process anxieties regarding war, starvation, and cosmic vulnerability. The prophecy's perceived accuracy is less about supernatural foresight and more about its ability to reflect timeless human fears through a modern lens. A moment of collective renewal. Despite the imagery of turmoil, the renewal of the centuries offers a positive counter-narrative of a necessary fresh start. The man of light rising represents the hope that follows the fall of shadows. Ultimately, these interpretations suggest that while external chaos is inevitable, the stars will guide those who look within, emphasizing internal resilience during global shifts. 2026 and the need for narrative. The legacy of the long spark highlights a critical convergence. Modern geopolitical and climate realities now echo the poetic metaphors of steel, famine, and plague. While the 2026 Atlas Comet family acts as a literal manifestation of the long spark, human psychology utilizes apophenia to find order in chaos. This suggests a timeless, biological drive to project meaning onto astronomical events during periods of intense global transformation. The 2026 Enigma, Decoding the Two Suns. This impending cosmic anomaly centers on quatrain 41, where Nostradamus describes a great star burning for 7 days and a cloud causing two suns to appear. By integrating galactic superwave theories with 16th century astrology, we analyze these verses as markers for extreme paradigm shifts. The data suggests that humanity is perpetually mapping current anxieties onto this 500-year track record of alleged foresight. The Nostradamus File. The seer, Michel de Nostradamus, published his 942 highly ambiguous quatrains in 1555. His legacy persists because these poetic structures perpetually map to humanity's greatest paradigm shifts, from the Great Fire of London to modern nuclear anxieties. Scientifically, this illustrates how archaic datasets can be retrofitted to explain current global volatility, transforming a 16th century physician into a permanent fixture of predictive cultural analysis. This specific translation warns of a cosmic anomaly where a great star burns for 7 days, creating a visual illusion of two suns. The verse connects celestial phenomena to earthly triggers, a big mastiff howling all night and a great pontiff changing territory. This 100% encoded message links orbital instability directly to the collapse or relocation of major global institutions, creating a framework for systemic transition. Hypothesis 2, the galactic superray. Proposed by Dr. Paul Laviolette, the mechanism involves an outburst of superhot cosmic ray particles from the galactic core traveling at near light speed. This would create a brilliant blue-white light, thousands of times brighter than any star, visible even in broad daylight. Scientifically, this provides a literal explanation for the two suns phenomenon, linking the Nostradamus quatrains to potential high-energy astrophysical events from the Milky Way. Cosmic dust influx. The two suns phenomenon begins with a superray that pushes massive waves of intergalactic dust into our solar system. This dust envelopes and heavily energizes the sun. Consequently, the solar corona, agitated by this accumulation, begins to flare wildly. To an observer on Earth, the combination of the glowing blue-white galactic outburst and our flaring, cloud-obscured sun creates a terrifying binary star illusion. The bearded star is interpreted by scholars as a massive comet entering the atmosphere near 48 degrees north. The resulting impact could cause Tunguska-level devastation, flattening thousands of square kilometers and injecting massive debris into the stratosphere. This dust would filter sunlight and ruin harvests across the northern hemisphere, turning a celestial long spark into a definitive driver of global famine and environmental collapse. The historical precedent, Fatima, 1917. The localized 1917 anomaly at Fatima serves as a documented historical prototype for this looming global event. This phenomenon is considered cyclical, the precedent has been set, and a global replication is approaching. By analyzing the anatomy of a miracle, we see accounts of clouds parting and the sun appearing as a spinning, silvery disk separate from its usual light, mirroring Nostradamus's two suns. The narrative extends to the prophecy of the popes by Saint Malachi. It suggests a convergence in 2026 to 2027 where the great pontiff, Pope Leo XIV, is forced to flee a ruined Vatican during a time of global conflagration and inundation. The cycle of replication. Prophetic numerology and astrological markers suggest that historical repetition is imminent. Nostradamus's predictions are deeply tied to planetary alignments, specifically Mars ruling its path among the stars, which creates cyclical windows of extreme geopolitical and cosmic volatility. The focal point for the return of this specific anomaly is the year 2026. Convergence, the year 2026. Forecasts for 2026 increasingly warn of a fireball of great destruction entering the atmosphere. This celestial threat coincides with a breakdown of the post-Cold War order and rapid technological acceleration. Additionally, the Ticino warning, Quatrain 2:26, specifically highlights 2026 conflict near the Swiss-Italian border, where the region is prophesied to be overflowing with blood. The catalyst of chaos. In Nostradamus's lexicon, the big mastiff represents the dogs of war. This howling coincides with the celestial anomaly while Mars rules its path, triggering widespread terrestrial conflict. These prophecies point to a dramatic shift in global power, escalation between East and West, and the rise of controversial leaders driving nationalist tensions. The flight of the pontiff. To avoid approaching calamity, the Vatican's leader is prophesied to flee Rome. This aligns with the 12th century St. Malachi prophecy of the popes, which identifies the final pontiff, Peter the Roman, guiding the church through tribulation before the fall of Rome. This timeline synchronizes with the projected 2026 window and the reign of Pope Leo XIV. The Aegean prophecy. As shadows fall, the man of light is predicted to rise, with stars guiding those who look within. Looking beyond current ciphers, Century 2, Quatrain 52 presents a chilling vision of seismic collapse and geopolitical war in the Mediterranean. This Aegean prophecy serves as the next chapter in the anatomy of Nostradamus's visions of earthquakes and crumbling empires. The enigma of Century 9, Quatrain 31. This key clue explores the profound puzzle of earthquakes and sunken islands attributed to the 16th century seer. Within the complex architecture of Nostradamus's work, Century 9, Quatrain 31 serves as a focal point for analyzing geological upheaval and historical anomalies. By scrutinizing these archaic verses, we investigate whether they represent a genuine predictive dataset or a linguistic framework engineered for perpetual relevance throughout shifting human eras. The Prophet and the Puzzle. In 1555, Michel de Nostradamus released Les Prophecies, a collection of 942 quatrains designed as cryptic, flexible puzzles. His method utilized intentional ambiguity, blending French, Italian, Greek, and Latin with complex symbolism and anagrams to obscure meaning. This analytical survival strategy was engineered to avoid charges of witchcraft. Consequently, these quatrains remain adaptable, allowing successive generations to apply them to almost any historical or scientific era. The Artifact. This original text, Century 9.31, presents a chilling narrative of seismic instability and sudden transition. It references a tremblement de terre at Morterra and a St. George X island that is half submerged. The verse concludes with an awakening war and abysses torn open within a temple during Easter. Scientifically, this artifact functions as a linguistic bridge, connecting Renaissance poetic structures to potential environmental and geopolitical catastrophes across centuries. The literal translation. The trembling of land at Mortera provides a literal baseline for decoding these 500-year-old ciphers. The verse describes the tin island of St. George being half sunk while a period of peace is abruptly awakened by war. Most striking is the description of the temple at Easter where abysses are torn open. These specific phrases, Mortera, St. George, and Easter, act as primary variables for both historical retrospective analysis and modern apocalyptic modeling. Isolating the clues. To decode this quatrain, we must isolate four primary clues: Mortera, a specific town in northern Italy; St. George and tin, referencing a patron saint and metal-rich island; war awakens, signifying the end of peace; and Easter at the temple, a temporal marker for localized destruction. This methodology treats the verse as a multivariable equation, testing how these localized sites and specific dates align with known history or projected futuristic catastrophes. A diverging path of interpretation. Because of its symbolic nature, interpreters are split into two primary methodologies for Quatrain 9.31. Path A. The historical anchor offers a retrospective reading, linking clues to a 19th century European conflict. Conversely, Path B. The apocalyptic vision views the verse as a futuristic warning of massive climate and seismic catastrophes. These diverging paths illustrate how a single poetic dataset can be utilized to explain both past human warfare and future environmental tipping points. Path A. The 1849 historical anchor. This interpretation focuses on the Battle of Mortera during the First Italian War of Independence. Rather than a literal seismic event, the trembling of land is decoded as the vibration of artillery and marching armies from the Austrian Empire and Piedmont Sardinia. This historical model maps the quatrain's localized clues directly to a specific 19th century conflict, suggesting the prophecy may actually be an archaic record of regional military upheaval. Path B. The apocalyptic vision. Interpreters who reject the 1849 theory read tremblement de terra as a literal, catastrophic earthquake capable of tearing open abysses. This futuristic path shifts the focus away from Italy, pointing directly at a dark prophecy for the United Kingdom. By moving from metaphorical artillery to literal tectonic collapse, this vision transforms the quatrain into a predictive model for world-altering seismic activity that threatens the structural stability of entire island nations. The sinking of England. This dark prediction envisions a seismic event so violent that the landmass of England is plunged halfway into the sea. The tin island of St. George refers to St. George, the patron saint of England, and the ancient tin mining operations at the Scilly Islands off the Cornwall coast. Scientifically, this interpretation maps 16th century poetic metaphors onto literal geographical markers, suggesting a futuristic tipping point where tectonic shifts fundamentally redraw the map of Northern Europe. Global inundation. Global inundation represents the modern synthesis of 16th century vision and 21st century climate data. This interpretive framework maps archaic metaphors onto the scientific stages of polar melt, rising sea levels, and catastrophic coastal submergence. By aligning the half-sunk tin island with contemporary environmental tipping points, analysts demonstrate how ancient omens are retrofitted to describe a world threatened by permanent geographical alteration and the disappearance of island nations. The ruined temple serves as a focal point for localized seismic forecasting, linking London's Westminster Abbey to a historical precedent of tectonic instability. Built upon the remains of an ancient Apollo temple destroyed by a 154 AD earthquake, the modern site is envisioned as the epicenter of a future Easter catastrophe. This analysis suggests a recurring geological cycle where abysses are literally torn open, transforming a spiritual landmark into a predictive marker for urban destruction. The mechanics of retroactive clairvoyance exposes the psychological process of selectively interpreting vague datasets after a major event has occurred. Skeptics argue that Nostradamus's writings lack pre-event utility, functioning instead as a linguistic mirror for post-hoc validation. By forcing the fit, such as twisting the meaningless word Kasich to represent the town of Kasale, interpreters often ignore original textual accuracy to satisfy a desired narrative of prophetic foresight. A Mirror for Our Fears illustrates why Quatrain 9.31 continues to dominate the modern psyche. Its vivid, terrifying depictions of torn abysses and sunken islands are engineered to capture the existential dread of both 19th century warfare and modern climate instability. Ultimately, the seer endures not through literal accuracy, but because his cryptic canvas provides a professional framework for every generation to project its deepest anxieties regarding systemic collapse and planetary vulnerability. The Architecture of Apocalypse. The Architecture of Apocalypse traces the digital metamorphosis of 400-year-old poetry into a viral 2026 nightmare. Through the lens of data analytics, we observe how archaic verses are algorithmically amplified to create a sense of impending doom. This evolution highlights a transition from historical record to a high-speed, social media-driven apocalypse, where Renaissance symbolism is repurposed to fuel modern panic and provide a structured narrative for a rapidly fragmenting global reality. Social media in flames. Social Media in Flames analyzes how AI-generated content and disinformation networks accelerate apocalyptic narratives. Digital echo chambers remove the friction of critical counterarguments, allowing theories of doom to gain unstoppable momentum. In the 2026 landscape, the interpretation of prophecy has shifted from generalized doomsday talk to micro-targeted algorithms. This systemic transition proves that the medium is actively molding the message, transforming ancient quatrains into high-velocity digital contagions. Century 2, Quatrain 93. Century 2, Quatrain 93 introduces a chilling narrative of transition, referencing the goddess of death pressing near the Tiber. This verse describes a sequence of disaster involving a great inundation, the capture of a central figure known as the chief of the ship, and a conflagration within a palace or castle. These descriptors provide a modular dataset that modern analysts utilize to map out potential timelines for institutional collapse and sudden, violent environmental or geopolitical shifts. Mapping the modern panic. Mapping the modern panic demonstrates the conversion of Renaissance metaphors into contemporary threats. The chief of the ship is retrofitted to represent modern political leaders, while the conflagration is viewed as a precursor to global war. Similarly, the Great Inundation is decoded as a civilization-altering climate event. This professional mapping illustrates how localized historical warnings are algorithmically scaled up to reflect the universal anxieties of the current multipolar and environmentally unstable era. From the Tiber to Tibet. From the Tiber to Tibet reveals a striking linguistic mutation driven by modern echo chambers. A localized 16th century reference to the Tiber River in Italy is algorithmically scaled up to represent a global glacial catastrophe in Tibet. Prophecy enthusiasts frequently alter geographical gates to fit a more catastrophic, worldwide narrative. This process demonstrates how a regional flood warning can be professionally mutated into a climate collapse scenario through the lens of modern predictive anxiety. The Renaissance reality. The Renaissance reality restores the original historical context to these cryptic verses. In 1555, the Tiber was simply Rome's primary river, and the chief of the ship referred directly to the Pope. The castle and palace represented specific Vatican landmarks like Castel Sant'Angelo. Scientifically, this confirms that Nostradamus was predicting a localized flood and the capture of a religious leader, rooted entirely in 16th century European politics rather than a global 2026 apocalypse. The mechanics of postdiction. Retroactive clairvoyance defines the systematic feedback loop of postdiction. It begins when vague text containing ambiguous metaphors, fire, floods, or falling leaders, exists. Once a modern disaster shocks the public, human psychology maps that specific trauma onto the ancient canvas. Finally, media and digital networks viralize the forced connection, amplifying the myth. This cycle transforms poetic vagueness into a perceived predictive masterpiece, illustrating a persistent biological drive to find order in real-world chaos. The 9/11 fabrication. The 9/11 fabrication serves as a stark warning about digital age disinformation. While a viral City of God quatrain swept the internet after the towers fell, the text was proven fabricated, a hoax created by splicing real verses with a 1997 student essay. The historical reality of Century 6, Quatrain 97, mentions the sky burning at 45 degrees. Yet users often ignore textual accuracy to satisfy a collective need for preordained narratives. The Hister illusion. The Hister illusion highlights how linguistic shoehorning alters history to fit modern narratives. While retroactive interpretations identify Hister as a misspelled Hitler, the term is actually a classical Latin geographical name for the lower Danube River. Deconstructing Century 2, Quatrain 24, reveals the text describes a geographical battlefield near this river rather than a person's birth. This illustrates the powerful tendency to bend ancient datasets to fit significant modern personas. The 2026 zeitgeist. The 2026 zeitgeist is defined by systemic instabilities that drive a psychological need for apocalyptic frameworks. As we transition from petrostates to electrostates, intensifying geo-economic confrontations and trade wars create a volatile global landscape. We project our fears onto ancient texts to process multipolarity without multilateralism. The data suggests that as institutional narratives fail, humanity returns to 16th century metaphors to anchor modern economic anxiety and existential dread. Climate anxiety as prophecy maps real-world 2026 environmental crises onto Nostradamus' poetic imagery. The predicted rivers of blood and great inundation find literal parallels in spreading oceanic red tides and catastrophic algal blooms. Simultaneously, data on melting alpine glaciers shows a sharp decline in ice volume heading toward 2026. This professional mapping illustrates how biological tipping points are interpreted as the fulfillment of ancient catastrophic omens through our contemporary lens. The true algorithmic swarm reinterprets Century I, Quatrain 20 SIXS Great Swarm of Bees. While many link this to drone warfare, the true swarm is the decentralized, hive-mind viral spread of misinformation across digital platforms. Social media ecosystems fulfill the prophecy by capitalizing on sensationalist fear. Reflecting the present concludes that Nostradamus' enduring relevance stems entirely from his vagueness. His verses function as survival mechanisms and cultural mirrors rather than predictive tools, reflecting the deepest fears of the present generation. In 2026, interpreters actively mold these archaic quatrains to fit our specific technological and political frameworks. Ultimately, the age molds the prophecy, demonstrating that we use ancient poetry to navigate the complexities and uncertainties of our contemporary reality.